were you driving up here this afternoon, or you didn't take the bus, or? No. So, but you've obviously read President Obama's speech.
I actually saw the speech before we took off.
Oh, you did see it before you took off?
Yeah, on Iran, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was one of those seminal moments of his presidency.
It absolutely was.
And how do you view it from that sense?
Well, look, I was with him in 2007 when he famously got into a colloquy with some of the other primary opponents at a debate in which he said he answered a question, and he was asked would he engage in discussions with our adversaries, including Iran, and he said yes, and this became a big thing in the campaign, you'll remember, and the other campaigns pounced on him for being naive and so on. I remember the next morning, we always had a conference call in the morning, and the president, or then Senator Obama, called into the conference call, and he never joined this conference call. He said, I just want you guys, I don't want anybody backing off. He said, I believe what I said. I think we've got to explore other paths besides war to try and resolve these issues, and you can't resolve them if you're not talking. And he said, we're on the right side of this, so I don't want anybody backing off. And so, you know, I had a radio interview earlier tonight, and I was asked about, you know, the last 8 months and how productive they've been, and why did he have such a dry spell before that, and you know, he's been working on this for 8 years. I mean, this was the project that he was talking about when he ran for president. I traveled the world with him in 2009 and 2010 when he met with foreign leaders, and in every single one of those meetings he made this passionate case for sanctions to bring Iran to the table to try and find a diplomatic resolution to this issue of their nuclear program, including meetings with the Chinese and the Russians. And it was nearly miraculous, as he pointed out today, that we were able to do that. There was a lot of skepticism, including skepticism among most of the people who are now attacking him today and saying we should keep the sanctions, but he got it done. And so this is the end of a long, difficult process. And so, you know, for me personally, as someone who's been on that journey with him, you know, I was very proud of that speech today because I knew what it represented, and I so thoroughly believe in his point, which is, you know, you can't avoid war. I was with him when he gave his Nobel Prize speech. He said, nonviolent protests wouldn't have stopped Hitler. There are times you can't avoid war, but you certainly should try. And if we haven't learned anything if we've learned anything in the last 12 years, it should be, you always have to ask the question, what next in foreign policy? Not the first step, but what next? If someone had asked the what next question about Iraq, perhaps we wouldn't have gone there, and the world would be quite different right now.
For those of you who didn't hear about or see the speech today, it was at American University, the same place that John F. Kennedy went 52 or 53 years ago to give a speech with a very similar tone to it. And one of President Obama's rhetorical skills is linking the deeds that he wants to get accomplished and has accomplished all the way back through American history and sort of setting the context for it in that sense. When you said what next,
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Yeah. Because I was at the Kennedy Library a few weeks ago, and they have an exhibit on the Cuban Missile Crisis, including the tapes of the deliberations, the private deliberations of the Kennedy War Cabinet during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And as the president moved toward, there are a couple of things that struck me. One is Kennedy said, you know, I won't say this publicly, but you can kind of see the Soviet point of view. We've got missiles in Turkey pointed at them, right. And so they see this as an equivalence. And of course that became this sort of the subterranean way to resolve this issue, because we ended up removing those missiles. But the blockade was the path that he took in the short run. And in this war council was Curtis LeMay, the model for the whole Dr. Strangelove thing. And Curtis LeMay was chief of staff of the Air Force, and he just blistered Kennedy in these meetings. He said, Mr. President, this is Munich all over again. This is appeasement. And I've always felt that Obama, in temperament and approach, was most like John F. Kennedy. And it really struck me as I listened to these tapes, having spent time in some similar kinds of meetings with the president, how similar they were, and how similar the arguments against these efforts to try and resolve things peacefully were. I mean, the whole Munich, and which is always, as he pointed out today, it's always the easy handle anytime you try and resolve something diplomatically.
Barack Obama and JFK, Bill Clinton and LBJ is sort of a simplistic way that I've always looked at their personalities in some sense.
I don't think you look at things in simplistic ways. I've read your books.
Okay. The what next aspect of Barack Obama has always totally intrigued me, and the way I've tried to explain him by studying his past was looking at all the moments when he could have been trapped. And he always figured a way around the trap by asking himself beforehand, what's next and what's next after that. Yes. And I'm sure that has played out in his presidency to the point where now, in some sense, I mean, you do have 17 Curtis LeMays running for president and a whole news channel of Curtis LeMays.
Yes.
But he's basically past the last of the really serious traps, and that, in some sense, in my mind, has freed him up in his last 8 months.
Yeah. I was saying earlier that watching these last 8 months, I feel a little bit guilty because the role that I played when I was his strategist and advisor through 2 elections and in my years in the White House was oftentimes to offer the kind of, well, we got to be a little cautious about this. We have to be a little careful. Now, most of the time he overruled me, I mean, I always say I like him so much because he listened to me so little. But, when we were considering health care, for all the reasons that you can imagine, having just heard my wife, my splendid, incredible wife, speak, healthcare was a very, very issue close to me. We almost went bankrupt when I was a young reporter trying to afford Lauren's medications and treatments because they weren't covered by insurance, and she had a pre-existing condition and we couldn't get other insurance. And I felt that profoundly. I knew the problems with the system, but my job was to advise him on politics, and I also knew 7 presidents had tried, 7 presidents had failed, and when I made that point, he said, if we don't get it done in the first 2 years, we won't get it done, and the system will continue to implode, tens of millions more people without insurance. And he said, what are we supposed to do, just put our approval rating on the shelf and admire it for 8 years, or are we supposed to draw down on it to try and get something done? And, every time someone wanted him to throw in the towel, I mean, I was all in once he decided, but I did have to inform him from time to time that we were taking on a lot of water. I remember, relevant to the state of Wisconsin, I was with him, I went into the Oval Office in the summer of 2009, and he had just come back from Wisconsin, and I said, we're taking on significant water on this, and you need to know. He said, I'm sure you're right, but I just got back from Green Bay, and I met a woman who was 36 years old. She had 2 children and a husband, and they both had jobs and insurance, but she had stage 4 breast cancer, and now she's hit her lifetime caps, and she's just terrified that she's going to die and leave her family bankrupt. I was standing in the Oval Office with him when we were and I felt his hand in the small of my back as he was leading me out while he was, and we stopped at the door. He said, that's not the country we believe in, so let's keep on fighting. And some few weeks later, someone made the case that we can't pass the bill, we ought to throw in the towel. Turned to his legislative director, and Phil Shalero, and he said, Phil, what do you think the chances are? And Shalero said, well, it depends how lucky you feel, Mr. President, which is not what you want to hear if you're the president. And Obama just smiled and said, Phil, I'm a black guy named Barack Obama, and I'm president of the United States.
He said, I feel lucky every day.
What I'm seeing in the last 8 months, first of all, I'm taking great delight because everybody, just in our infinite wisdom as a political culture, his administration was pronounced dead the day after the midterm election, and he's had the most productive period he's had since the first couple of years. But what I see him doing now is taking on all that unfinished business, some of which was deferred because of political obstacles and considerations, and some of which were just, it took this long for them to germinate. But I see a guy today who is completely at peace and enjoying the freedom to pursue these things, knowing that he has limited time left, and he wants to make every single day count and make as much progress as he can make. And it's been, for those of us who've been with him all these years, it's really been a inspiring time.